On today's podcast, we sit down with John Martin Keith, artist, songwriter, guitarist, podcaster, and the creative force behind You Can Make a Living in the music industry. After 25 years in Nashville and countless stories from the front lines, John shares his insider perspective on what it really takes to build and sustain a career in music today. We dive into the realities of independent artistry, the essential mindset for long-term success, and how definitions of success are rapidly changing. John talks about learning firsthand from legendary figures like Stephen Curtis Chapman why relationships matter more than ever, and how emerging artists can navigate the noise to find the right partnerships. Plus, get ready for stories, practical strategies, and fresh inspiration, whether you're an aspiring artist, songwriter, or music business pro looking to level up. This is one episode you can't afford to miss. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're excited to welcome a true multi-hyphenate from the Nashville music scene, singer-songwriter, guitarist, and podcast host, John Martin Keith, also known as Marty. John is the creator of the podcast You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry and has spent over 25 years carving out his own path as an independent artist, songwriter, and mentor. In our conversation, we dive deep into the realities of building a sustainable music career in today's ever-changing landscape. Marty also shares why he launched his podcast to fill the knowledge gap for artists just starting out, what defines lasting success beyond just fame and sales, and how the power of perseverance, relationships, and authenticity can make all the difference in this business. Plus, you'll hear insider stories, including wisdom from Stephen Curtis Chapman and practical advice for choosing the right collaborators, building trust, and staying true to your artistic vision. This is an episode packed with real talk, inspiration, and actionable insights for anyone serious about making music their life's work. You don't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, ready to crush it in the music world? Whether you're an artist, band, or future music biz pro, MUBUTV's personalized coaching is your secret weapon.
We'll work with you side by side, sharpening your songs, building your brand story, locking in your ideal audience, and powering up your social media game.
Starting fresh or ready for the next level, we cover everything. Live shows, marketing hacks, branding, all tailored just for you.
Flexible coaching packages let you decide what fits your time and budget. Single sessions or discounted bundles that make investing easy.
Imagine the boost after just one session. Clearer goals, smarter strategies, and unstoppable confidence. Get started with a free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com. That's book.mubutv.com. Let's make your music career unstoppable. Hey, Insiders, are you ready to take serious control of your music career? Whether you're dreaming of getting signed, finding the perfect artist manager, or landing your music in movies and TV shows, MUBUTV has you covered with 3 essential free guides.
First, learn how to contact A&R the right way. The insider secrets to approaching executives without burning bridges and with confidence.
Next, discover how to attract the right artist manager, when to start looking, what to expect, and how to find someone who truly believes in your vision.
And finally, unlock the world of sync licensing with how to pitch to music supervisors the right way. Get your music placed in film and TV, reach new audiences, and open up exciting revenue streams.
These guides are packed with real-world advice, practical steps, and the do's and don'ts every artist needs.
If you're listening on this podcast or watching on YouTube, just check the description below to download your free copies now. This is your blueprint for turning dreams into reality. Don't miss out.
Hi, this is Ryan Carella, host of the Break the Business podcast and principal attorney at RKPA Law, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is singer, songwriter, guitarist, and podcast host, John Martin Keith. This was a wonderful conversation, Eric, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to speak with, I guess it's John Martin Keith, but we were calling him Marty in the conversation. You know, he has been at this a long time, and so many of the things he brought up. I love the fact that, you know, he talked about that success is very personal, and we've heard that theme come up before, you know, where each person coming into the business today, who's an artist, who is committed to building a career, really has to define what success is for them. Right. Some people, it's just about making a living. Some people, it's about, I want to have a number one hit single. Some people, it's about touring, and hit songs are not important, but building an audience is. Sometimes it's about having, you know, a big record deal, right? Or, you know, being on the
Everybody's
charts.
different.
But he's different, and he talked about that, which I thought was, you know, very, very interesting. Success, you know, I think he said it's not just about record sales, but about finding sustainable fulfillment and financial stability for yourself. Each person has to define that in terms of, you know, what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rich. And one of the other areas that I thought was key in this was that perseverance is key. The most successful artists he's met are simply the ones who didn't give up, even though repeated setbacks and uncertainty were there. You know, I know that intimately. And I think every artist out there who's really doing this knows that when you persevere, you've been through, it's a roller coaster ride. You're going through the highest of highs and through the lowest of lows. It's how you navigate those lows that get you to the next high. And so I think that that's such a true statement, that perseverance is really, truly the key to success in this industry. When you're beaten down and you feel like there's no hope, something happens and that just gets you to that next step. And that's kind of the way I've kind of navigated those highs and lows in my own career. So it's something that really connects with me.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's a very, very deeply relevant point to the artistic landscape or the artist landscape of today. Very, very much so. And the only way to get to that is to have a solid foundation of what's most important to you as an artist. And you have to give that some real thought.
And with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with John Martin Keith.
Marty, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, when you launched your podcast, You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry, what gap did you see that wasn't being filled for artists just starting out?
You know, that's a great question. Thank you guys for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I think my wife and I were talking about it. I mean, I've been in Nashville for 25 years now as this episode goes to air. And throughout that time, over the course of those years, I'd met people in the industry that, you know, were obviously further along than I was at the time, and just had so much more knowledge and experience. And so as time went by and I started to have that as well, people were always asking me, how do you make a living doing music, you know, and the different things that you've done? And so I had a lot of people over the years started asking me that question. And so my wife and I were talking about it, thought, you know what, I think a great thing would be to start a podcast to try to fill in those gaps and to answer those questions. So I thought, you know what, I've known so many people over the years that do this. We should have them on and ask them, you know, kind of take a deep dive. I think that's what's different about my podcast than most others, is that it's a real deep dive into the history of who the guest is. And you know, I've got celebrities on, I've got working class musicians and people behind the scenes in all parts of the industry that make the industry work, you know, as a cohesive thing. And so having them tell their story of how they grew up, what got them into the industry, and then also how they've worked their way up through the industry and whatever it is that they have done. Sometimes it's just one thing, sometimes it's multiple things, but to where they are successful now in their careers, and to give, you know, real life experience advice to people who are wanting to do what it is that they might have done or currently do in the industry. And so, you know, giving that real life examples of, okay, here's how I did it. Here are the steps that you need to take to be able to do this. And at the time, until I met you guys doing MUBUTV, Insider Podcast and everything that you guys do, until I met you guys, there was no one else to my knowledge doing what it is that we do. And so I know that we're sort of a companion podcasts to each other and how we approach things, which I love. But that's kind of, I hope that answers your question. That's kind of where I wanted to go with it, and to really just sort of deep dive into, these things that never get talked about that I've ever heard on shows, on podcasts or interviews of any kind. And so that was sort of the launching pad for it, if that answers your question.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Marty, great talking to you again. We're really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Eric.
I wanted to ask you, after talking to so many artists over the years, is there a moment, habit, or mindset you've seen repeatedly in those who go on to build truly enduring careers, something that others often overlook?
Yeah, great question again. I think the people that are successful, the most successful, are the ones who just don't give up. And I'm going to put myself in that category. People have asked me that all the time. It's like, when you're sort of banging your head on the wall a lot of times, and it feels like you're not getting any traction on what you're doing. And I've experienced that multiple times. Even recently, sometimes I'm like, man, I'm done. This is exhausting. But at the end of the day, I hate saying that phrase, but when it comes down to it, I think it's just, if you are the one who keeps going when everyone else walks away from it because they didn't get out of it what they wanted or what they thought they were supposed to have or whatever, even though it may look different than what you were thinking it was going to be. I think if you just have the perseverance to keep going and to find ways to make it work, then you're the ones that are going to be successful, the most successful out of it. And there are people that have, we all know this, that we've seen people come and shoot up quickly and then, have their 15 minutes and then they just sort of fade out and then they're gone and they walked away from it, or, they got dropped from a label or from a publishing deal or whatever it was. And so that was just kind of the end of it. And they went back and they do whatever else that it is that they do now. And that's fine. But I think, I've always said, and I kind of have to stick to it now because I've told so many people on my show, that I'm going to be the one that will be standing at the end because I'm just never going to give up, and whether it's what I expected it to be, what I want it to look like, doesn't really matter. If I'm able to do what I love and make a living at it and support my family, then I'm going to find a way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting listening to you, Marty, because as you were speaking, I was thinking, that really goes to the core of something that we believe, and we've talked about extensively on the show, which is that we're in an era, and I say this as somebody who's been in this business a very, very long time, we're in an era where we are completely redefining what it means to be successful. And that's a very important point that you just made, because success used to mean a hit record, big album sales, big ticket sales. And that was kind of like, the limited definition. And that,
right.
Tidy little classification, it just doesn't ring true today. There are so many different levels, as you pointed out. And, people have to define success for themselves. And making a living at music was something that was far more difficult to do in the old days because you had so many rigid parameters, and today that just isn't the case anymore. So it's a very interesting point that when you talk about that, about being able to, make a living and support your family. I mean, you didn't hear that back in the day. You heard, that limited definition of big hit record or big album sales, or, it was like an all or nothing kind of proposition.
Sure. Yeah. To me, it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way, because like you talked about in the old days, in order to have success, you had to have a record deal, you had to have a publishing deal, you had to have music on the radio and MTV and whatever, and that's because that's what we saw. And because it was such a limited opportunity, you had to have a label believe in you,
right,
to sign you to be able to do that. But if you had that, then there was a pretty good chance of some success, that whatever that's going to look like. Nowadays, granted, we don't have to have a record label or a publisher to be able to do music full time. And that is great in that sense. And that's the world that I live in because I'm not signed to a record deal or anything like that. So, and I've, for 30 plus years, I've been at this, and I've always done it on my own, which is great. I think for me personally, I think the downside is that now anybody can do it, and so there's not as much of a
barrier to entry.
a barrier, but also there's the level of professionalism isn't the same either.
Right.
Like anybody can throw it out there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just the quality is not as good across the board. Maybe it's great for some people, it's not great for others. And I think, as far as for streaming services and all that kind of stuff, distribution, we can all put our music out there, and that's great. But then you run into, the business has changed so much that radio is almost irrelevant nowadays to a lot of people, and CD sales and that kind of thing. But that's what I lived on, man. I made my living off of selling CDs, and so streaming is a completely different beast. And I hate streaming, but you have to deal with it. It is what it is. But the things have just changed so much. But I think those are some of the things I think make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, can you share a story from your podcast or from your experience of an artist who went from unknown to building a sustainable career, based on what we're talking about, and what steps do you feel made the difference for them?
The first one that pops to my head is my mentor, Stephen Curtis Chapman, if people are familiar with
who that is. Very. Yeah, he's a leading artist, yeah. Yeah,
so Christian music artist. He's the biggest Christian music artist in history. He's got 50 number one singles and BMI Icon Award and just everything, all that stuff. So he's like the pinnacle of the Christian music world. Well, his dad was my guitar teacher. I've grown up knowing his family my whole life. And he's been a friend over the years. And he's a person that I've watched, and I've tried to build my career after kind of what he has done. And so I can say this story just because I kind of watched it happen to some degree. It's like he grew up doing music, playing guitar, he and I both took guitar lessons from his dad. And so Stephen, he grew up in high school and writing songs and just sort of doing that. Well, went off to college and came down to Nashville, worked at Opryland USA, which was a theme park here in Nashville way back in the day, and was doing that kind of thing and playing live shows, at a theme park and that kind of stuff. But then at the time he was also just writing Christian music, gospel music, and that kind of stuff. And he went to Anderson, Indiana, to a college there, Anderson University, and ended up getting to know Bill Gaither. Well, Bill Gaither is like the godfather of gospel music. And so Bill Gaither signed him to a publishing deal. And so started writing and getting cuts through that, started getting opportunities to write for the Imperials and Sandy Patty and different artists like that. Well, I think, you've got that success that's starting to build to some degree. Well, then he comes back to Nashville and tries to get a record deal and goes around to every label in town. And they all said no, from what I understand. And so however long that took, it's like they just weren't looking for his voice. They said his voice wasn't that great, whatever. And so he got an opportunity to go out to California to a label called Sparrow Records with some other artists, and went out and met with that label and played some songs for the label head. And the guy liked it and said, he played one song for him and said, hey, this is great. Do you have any more? So he said, yes, sir. Played him a second song. I like that. That's great. Do you have another song? Yes, sir. And so the thing was that he had a lot of songs built up, and it wasn't just, he had a voice or a look or whatever, but he had, it all comes back to the song, right? And so he had all of these songs, and he had the voice, and he has sort of the whole package there ultimately. And so they took a shot on him and gave him a deal, and he launched from that, and from that, over the course of 30 plus years, became the biggest thing in Christian music. And he's well respected I think in all genres of music. Anybody who knows who he is, he's very respected because of who he is, and not just because of his talent, but because of his personality and that kind of thing. So it's really been cool to watch him over the years go from, being the reason I know I can see it from that perspective is because he taught me guitar a couple of times when, before he even got his first record deal. So I was like in fifth grade or something like that, 5th or 6th grade. And he would come in, he would sub for his dad, and he would teach me guitar. And so I remember him from that, just being Steve Chapman. And then the next thing, he became Stephen Curtis Chapman, and it launched from there. And so I've watched the whole trajectory of that and try to build my career and my ministry off of that as well.
Marty, I wanted to ask you, you've seen artists successfully turn their work into a career without losing their voice. What choices or approaches made that possible?
I think it's staying true to who you are. We're always trying to grow and expand our abilities, our talents, and what we know how to do and what we think we can accomplish. But I think throughout the whole process is staying true to who you are as an artist and if you're a songwriter, not walking away. Because, I know that, and Rich, I know you're going to know this for sure because you worked at a couple of different labels over the years. But I think a lot of labels, especially back in the old days, or production companies or whoever, they're trying to build an artist. They're trying to mold them into what they think they should be or what the label wants them to be. And a lot of times, I think a lot of those artists were not successful ultimately because they kind of went along with it and they were doing something that wasn't really who they were or who they wanted to be. And sometimes I think a lot of them were able to break out of that. They started off one thing and they finally said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be who I am. And once they did that, then they really took off and became, household names more so than they were at the beginning because they just said, I'm not going to pretend to be something that I'm not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think a lot of artists have a good gut instinct of who they are ultimately. And I think that you've seen that change a lot now with artists that, they're letting them become more themselves as opposed to a record label kind of taking control of the situation and building that person from the ground up.
Sure. And even, again, with putting out your own music now, everything's so much indie, independent artists and just your own distribution through DistroKid or CD Baby or whoever and all the streaming stuff. It's like without having a label or someone telling you who they think you should be, I think most artists pretty much know who they're trying to be, who they want to be, and they've got a more solid foundation to start there as opposed to having to kind of jump through some different hoops and then get there eventually, if that makes sense.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey there, insiders. Are you dreaming of making it big as a musician, artist, or industry pro? Well, at MUBUTV, we offer personalized coaching to help you turn that dream into reality.
Think of us as your personal guides, helping you polish your songs, craft your story, find your fans, and grow your social media like a pro.
No matter where you are in your journey, we've got the tools and strategies to take you higher. From live gigs to branding and marketing, our coaching is all about you.
Choose what fits your budget, from single sessions to value-packed bundles.
Start with a free 15-minute discovery call today at book.mubutv.com. Your music career is waiting. Remember why you started making music? That feeling of passion, hope, and longing, wanting someone to hear your story?
But chasing success can be confusing. Who do you reach out to? When? How do you avoid mistakes that could close doors?
At MUBUTV, we believe every artist deserves a clear path forward. That's why we've created 3 free guides that cover the essential skills every musician needs.
How to contact A&R executives with confidence. How to attract an artist manager who gets you. How to pitch your music for film and television placements.
These aren't just tips. They're blueprints designed for artists who want more than just dreams. They want results.
If you're listening right now on this podcast or watching on YouTube, look in the description below. Download these free guides that will change how you approach your music career forever.
Don't wait. Your future fans are waiting.
Hello, this is A&R Executive Kim Bowie. Are you an insider? Because I am. Subscribe now.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. As I'm listening to you, I'm realizing, you also, which we touched on earlier in the conversation, you also are an artist and you've had your own journey. And I think our audience would be curious. I'm very curious. How did your own journey into the music industry shape the vision behind your podcast? Because you and Eric and I in MUBUTV were very much aligned in the educational aspect. So just curious, how did your, journey in the music industry shape what you do with the podcast, the vision you had behind the podcast?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Probably a few different things, but just off the top of my head, again, knowing who I am and what I'm trying to do as an artist and as a songwriter. First and foremost, I'm in Christian music. I'm a worship pastor. I do gospel music and that kind of thing. But I also write country music. I write pop music. I write music for sync, TV, film stuff. So in production music. So I work in a lot of genres for different reasons. But at the core, I am a Christian music artist. That's who I am. That's what I've always wanted to do first and foremost. So that will always inform what I do in other things, because as a follower of Christ, there are certain things that I will and won't write about, if that makes sense. Certain topics that I'm not going to write about because I don't believe in that, or I don't, it's stuff I just can't do, So I've got that, and that tells me certain aspects of who I am and where I'm going to go musically. And so, I play a lot of churches. I played a lot of youth camps over the years. I play a lot of conferences and things like that. But, I am able to branch out and do other things as well, as long as there is sort of some guardrails to what that is. So that has helped me know who I am and what I want to do. And as far as the podcast goes, as far as the educational thing, it's like, well, I'm also a guitar teacher. Okay. So I've got students, I've been teaching students for many, many years. People come in and they're always asking me, when they realize that I do this for a living, I'm not just a guitar teacher. I'm also an artist for 30 plus years and a songwriter, and I've got music on TV and all this kind of stuff. Well, that kind of piques their interest in, oh, that's cool. I didn't know you did that. Maybe how did you do that? And how can I do that? And so that's part of it. Those kind of questions start seeping in through some of my students. And then, when I'm out playing concerts or I'm out leading worship somewhere and they know that this is what I do for a living, people always come up and say, I want to do this for a living. How did you do that? I get that all the time. And I think those are some of the things that helped us, get the idea of, okay, we got people asking all these questions, and I'm not seeing that stuff on podcasts. I'm not hearing that on the internet necessarily of, people giving answers to that. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to bring in people who are more successful in a lot of ways, more successful than I am, who've been at it a lot longer. I'll say it that way, and just have different perspectives because they work in different parts of the business that I'm not as familiar with maybe. And so selfishly, it's given me an opportunity to learn things that I either didn't know at all, or I know something about, but it's helped me grow more than I had before and build some relationships that I didn't have. So I think hopefully that answers your question there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Marty, I want to switch gears a little bit. Collaboration can accelerate a career, but, not all partnerships are equally valuable. How should emerging artists evaluate potential collaborators, managers, or industry partners to help ensure alignment with their visions and goals?
Wow, you guys are asking the deep questions today. That's a good question. I think that, again, going back to being true to if you know who you are and what you want to accomplish as an artist or a songwriter, and you're trying to find someone to come alongside you, and as a manager or a promoter or, booking agent, whatever that might be, is making sure, obviously research, looking up, okay, I'll put it from this perspective as being in Christian music. There are, obviously, you're not going to go to someone who's in death metal management, or polka or whatever, and ask them to be your manager to try to get you into churches or, Christian music environments, whatever that is. So researching and being familiar with who is working in that particular field that you're wanting to do. And then, researching, I do a lot of research just because of when I do my own booking. I don't have a booking agent. I don't have management. I've been doing my own stuff for 30 plus years. Not because I've always wanted to do that. There have been plenty of times where I've wanted to have people come alongside me and help push things forward. But sometimes when I've had those opportunities, it's a lot of times it's turned out that maybe that's not really what I want. Maybe that's not the kind of person I'm really looking for. They don't necessarily, or they're not doing what I think it is that they should be doing, if that makes sense. And so finding people that align with what your goals are. And if you can find that, try to set up a meeting and talk to them and see, what would it take to bring them on for them to represent you in whatever, category that might be.
No, that makes complete sense. Marty, I want to ask you, we've been talking a lot about the elements of your life, inspiration, and I'm curious, throughout your own life, have there been any books or films or documentaries that you have found to be particularly inspirational that you could recommend to our audience?
That Thing You Do.
Oh, okay.
Great
Yeah,
movie.
great movie. Yeah, we all I love that one.
Yep.
Right. I mean, I think that's the best movie that you can watch that's music industry related. I mean, I think I know it's set in the 60s, and kind of all that, but I think it shows, number one, it shows the journey of a song, and it's so, because people listen to a song on the radio or whatever, and they hear it one way, and that's all they know, right? We hear what the finished product is, but for those of us that are in music, that are songwriters and that love the whole process, it's like, how did that song become what it is? I love being in the studio and watching something being born, the elements that no one even knows about, to the finished product, and kind of watching it all unfold. And I think that movie, That Thing You Do, really shows the evolution of that song from how it started off as a ballad, and then it slowly became, this bigger thing. So about the end of it, you got go-go dancers and whatever on stage going with it, and it's this huge production, and then it all falls apart because the people involved had too much ego, and the song was great, but it couldn't sustain a career necessarily, just the one song. So became the one hit wonders. So I think that's a really good example, to be honest. I know that might seem kind of weird, but I really do think it's a really good.
Yeah, it's the first one that we've had that's made that suggestion. Yeah, it's a great film.
Great film.
Yeah. Marty, you've worked up close and personal with hundreds of artists at this point in your career. What do you feel is the number one thing that holds artists back from success in their own careers?
I think that ego. I think ego makes a big difference. Can kind of make you or break you. In Nashville, at least here in Nashville, I'm sure you guys say this out in LA, but being a good hang, we always say that a lot. If you're not someone who is good to hang out with, then nobody wants to work with you. And I think, if you're not, whether you're an artist or a songwriter or you're a musician that playing, in a band for someone, you get fired real fast if you're a jerk and nobody wants to be around you and you just think you're kind of a know-it-all.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a big red flag right there. So that's something to be really careful of.
Yeah. I've come to the point in my career, I just want to only work with good people. And if you're not a good person, I'm done, Yeah.
And the thing is like, you can be, and I talk about this a lot with various people, is that you can be the most talented person in the room, and versus someone who is mediocre talented or decently talented, I'll say. But if you're the person who is the most talented and you're just not a good person to be around and kind of a know-it-all and whatever, I'm going to hire the person who has less talent than you, but is a great person to be around.
Yeah.
Because, you got to spend days and weeks with these people, and live life with them. And, it's just not worth it the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Throughout my career, I'm not going to name names, but I've known many top executives in A&R and at labels who have said the same thing and who have told me stories about passing on artists who were, huge artists. They went on to have huge careers, but they weren't going to have them with that person for that very reason you just said. And the same thing with, why certain other artists have been kept around, because they're wonderful people, or they're great to be with, or they're so nice. It's especially at the beginning of a career. I think that's just such an important point you made. If you can't connect with people, and that's all about trust and chemistry,
Sure.
which I think is such an important factor in it.
Yeah. And we talk about, one of the main aspects of my podcast is that we talk about relationships. The music business is built on relationships.
Yes.
And so that's what we're talking about. If you're not a good person to hang out with and be around and whatever, that's a relationship issue. And you've got to be able to do that. And so, because who it's a small town. I mean, this is a small business, but Nashville's a small town for sure. And
word gets around quick.
Word travels fast.
Yep.
If you're a person that's worth being around or not. And so I always want to make sure that I'm a person that's worth being around. I try to be, at least.
Yeah, without exception. Marty, if you were giving one piece of advice to an independent artist who's committed to building a career in music for themselves, what would it be?
That's great. A piece of advice. I'm kind of repeating myself, I think, but I'm going to say, be a good person, be kind to people, be hardworking, always come in. I mean, I think there's different aspects, if you're looking to be an artist versus a songwriter or whatever it is, but whichever direction you're coming in, know who you are, know what you want to do, be a good person to be around to do it. Look for people that are farther along than you are, that have more experience than you do, and that are willing to invest in you and give advice. Maybe not all the time. He's like, you got to be really careful with that. You don't want to invade people's space and just kind of be, someone who's always poking at them. But, if there's someone that you can connect with that can give you advice and kind of help guide you along the way in some areas, then always look for those people. I've learned, especially throughout the making of the podcast, is that people that are way up in the industry are just like us. I mean, they're just, you guys are way up in the industry. You guys have been super kind to come on my show and let me be on yours, and to build a relationship. We've built a friendship because of that. And so I think approaching people and trying to build relationships, build friendships with them, not just to try to get something out of them, but because you genuinely want to know them as a person and to build a friendship. And, if that happens, then the other things will come, to at least to a certain extent, to where you can ask more advice, and they might be willing to help you do something. And if nothing else, to become a sounding board for you. It's like you might end up going off doing your own thing with, kind of a different direction, but they're always someone that you can go back to and, and just kind of get perspective about things on. And I think that's really important. I've got a friend named Eric Hertz, who is one of the biggest guys in the country music industry.
Oh yeah, he's very big. He's over at Empire. I know Eric.
Yeah. You know Eric. Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well,
Yeah.
Eric and I have known each other for 25 years. When I first moved to town, my roommate was really good friends with him. They're like, one of his best friends. And so we got to know each other. And so, and at the time, Eric was he was coming up in the industry as well. Like he was just kind of starting in the business side of things. He was just kind of starting that side of his career when I came into town to be an artist and a songwriter. And so we sort of come up together on different paths, but he is someone that if I need to reach out and ask a question, hey, what do you think about this? What's your opinion on this? Can you give me some advice on this? Whatever. He's happy to do it, and not because he's Eric Hurt of Empire, but because he's my friend Eric, and we've got that relationship, and I know I can trust him, and he knows that he can trust me. And so there's a trust there that we have, obviously, because of that. And I think that makes a big difference if you can build those relationships, a true friendship that with people that you want to get to know, not just because of, hey, what can you do for me? I think that's where people hit roadblocks and they end up walking away from it because they're trying to get something from people that they don't need to be trying to do that with. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Marty, how can people who want to work with you or, get a hold of the podcast to listen to your great podcast reach you? Is it through the website, socials? What are the best ways to get in touch?
Yeah, the best way is going to be probably through my website. johnmartinkeith.com is my website. And you can reach out to me through that. I mean, I'll give you my email. My contact email is contact@johnmartinkeith.com. So they're welcome to reach out to me. I mean, I've got Instagram. I got Facebook. You can reach out to me through that as well. And then, of course, the podcast is played on all the different platforms. So You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry is the podcast, and it's on all the different platforms that you can listen to. I don't know if you can contact through those things or not, but just my email or Facebook or the website are probably the easiest ways to actually connect with me. But anybody is welcome to reach out for sure.
Wonderful. Marty, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Thank you for your time and for your sharing of your experience. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. It's great to talk to you guys again.
Thank you. Eric, this was a wonderful conversation for a couple reasons. Number one, it was really interesting talking to people who are in literally our space.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's got a great podcast. You can make a living in the music industry, which everyone should check out.
And which we've been guests on.
Right. We've been guests on his show. Right.
Couple things that stood out to me in the conversation. One, how he talked about how almost like, selfishly, but not even selfishly, but just in terms of his own knowledge, how he learned from all the guests.
Right.
And we do too, in terms of what we're offering to everybody else. We're learning in that process.
Right.
That's how you grow. That's how you have information and great things to offer, is by learning and taking it in. So that was an interesting fact. The other thing that I thought was a very specific thing that stood out for me was his whole idea of, when you are building a career, that your character, who you are as a person, your values really matters, and how sometimes people may not like you as much, or you may not, even if you're extremely talented, if you're not a nice person, if you're not easy to work with, people will. And Rudy Sarzo, if you recall, spoke about that element. Like when we're going to take somebody out on tour, he spoke about that with Ozzy Osbourne, and they would much rather go with the person they can trust, that they like, that's reliable.
That might not be more talented, but they're that's reliable not going to cause and not going to cause problems. Who the hell wants that kind of crap going on?
Exactly, and it was interesting to hear him speak about that.
Right.
We haven't heard that particular philosophy or consciousness in a while, and I thought that really stood out to me.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas that I totally agree on. I mean, you get to a certain stage in life, Rich, and I've talked to you about this, where you just are done putting up with bullshit. And so for me, I want to just work with great people. That's why I work with you. You know what I'm saying?
Likewise.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the other areas that I loved about this interview was how artists can maintain their creative voice while building a career. And I quote, "I think that it's staying true to who you are. We're always trying to grow and expand our abilities, our talents. But I think throughout the whole process is staying true to who you are as an artist. And as if you're a songwriter, a lot of labels, especially back in the old days, they were trying to build an artist. They were trying to mold them into what they think they should be. A lot of those artists were not successful ultimately because they were doing something that wasn't really who they were. Once they did that, then they really took off. And that's such a, getting back to that gut instinct and taking advice. We talked about in the other interview, I think it was with Kim Bowie recently, where, having that team aspect and taking advice from a team is important. But there's also something to be said about when you have such conviction in you as an artist of what you're doing and what you believe in, that you have to see that through, but also, taking that advice. And so I really think that this point that Marty spoke about in this conversation was really something that was very important.
I couldn't agree more. And he is somebody who actually has had, 25 years of experience, doing this. And I love that story that he spoke about, with Stephen Curtis Chapman, who is one of the world's leading top Christian artists
of all
time. And how, everybody rejected him.
Right.
And it didn't diminish his commitment.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to have. And you got to remember, it's not just a job, it's a way of life, it's a commitment. That's the most important thing. And he spoke about so many things that I thought were so important, and just really important, I think, to emphasize and hear again. So hope you enjoyed that, and be sure to check out his podcast.
Yeah, You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry.
Business.
Yeah, check
Very
that
good.
out.
Yeah.
Highly recommended.
Definitely.
Hey, Insiders. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.